Good evening to all of you listening to Broken Promises. Tonight's story is titled, 6 Months After Our Divorce, My Ex-Husband Brought His Fiancée to My Door to Invite Me to Their Wedding. The moment he saw the newborn in my arms, he shoved her aside in a panic and rushed toward me. Seattle in September, the unseasonal rain drizzled down, like someone sprinkling a fine mist onto the roof. It wasn't cold, but it was damp enough that the blankets, hung out to dry all day, still smelled of rain. I lived in a small rented apartment near the Ship Canal. Tucked away in a quiet back alley with little foot traffic secluded enough for me to recover from childbirth without having to endure any gossip. My name is Ava, and I had given birth 5 days ago. The baby in the bassinet next to the sofa was my son. His nickname was Milo. I planned to name him Dominic officially, but I was waiting for his health to stabilize and for all the paperwork to be in order. He was born 10 days premature, his skin still pink and as delicate as a petal, his tiny hand grasping my finger with a heart-wrenching weakness. The doctor had been very clear: keep him warm, limit visitors, avoid drafts and air conditioning, and stick to the follow-up appointment schedule to monitor for jaundice and body temperature. It sounds simple, but when you're a new mother recovering alone, everything becomes a battle. Every time I turned over, my C-section incision throbbed as if someone had secretly threaded a steel wire through my skin and was pulling it taut. At night, my sleep was fitful. At the slightest whimper from my son, I would jolt awake, reflexively pressing my palm to his forehead to check his temperature. Sometimes, I would laugh at myself, a bitter, hollow laugh. Back when we were in love, I thought love was all I needed. Now, the saying life isn't a fairy tale hit me hard. Love alone can't pay the bills, and it can't keep anyone by your side. I had been divorced for 6 months. People say you feel a sense of relief after a divorce, but for me, it felt like being uprooted from a familiar tree and thrown onto foreign soil. I was a freelance interior designer, and my work was feast or famine, sometimes busy, sometimes not. My pregnancy had been a similar story. Sometimes there was someone with me, and sometimes there was only the sound of my own breathing in an empty room. I went to my checkups alone. On days when morning sickness was severe, I'd survive on saltine crackers and ginger ale. On the day I went in for my C-section, I signed the consent forms myself, because I was, legally, a single woman. David, my ex-husband, was the one who had walked out of my life so cleanly. He was a vice president at a major construction supply company, and he always spoke as if he were in a board meeting. The day we signed the papers, he looked at me for a long time and said only one thing: let's just stop here. It'll be less exhausting for both of us. I didn't hold on, not because I was strong, but because I understood that when something is already cracked, holding on tighter only makes it shatter. This baby was the one thing I hadn't told him about. I didn't tell him not because I wanted to hide the child, but because I was afraid. Afraid people would see my son as a mistake. Afraid his family would view my child as nothing more than an heir to their lineage. And most of all, I was afraid of him coming back out of a sense of duty, only to leave again. Betray me once, shame on you. There are some wounds that don't need a knife. A single act of turning away is enough. Luckily, I wasn't completely alone. Hannah, my best friend, was a year older than me. She had a fiery temper but a heart of gold, loving her friends with a fierce, straightforward loyalty. Hannah ran a small diner, serving breakfast in the morning and lunch specials in the afternoon. She was always swamped, yet she still managed to find time to drop by. The day I was discharged from the hospital, Hannah brought over a pot of hot chicken noodle soup and a container of fresh spinach, telling me, "You can't recover properly without hot soup. You need to eat up to produce milk for the baby." I felt a lump form in my throat. It's strange how life works sometimes. Your own blood can feel distant, while your friends are right there beside you. Hannah couldn't stay long. The diner was her livelihood, missing even one shift meant falling short on grocery money. So, during the day, my apartment was quiet, filled only with the rhythmic hum of the breast pump, the whistle of the kettle, the ticking of the clock, and the soft breathing of a new mother trying desperately not to fall apart. I had created a military-like schedule for myself to keep from spiraling. In the morning, I'd change the baby's diaper and give him a sponge bath with a warm cloth. At noon, I'd take my medication, eat some soup, and practice standing up and taking a few steps. In the afternoon, while the baby slept, I'd quickly email old clients to postpone project deadlines and keep future prospects warm. At night, I'd watch over my son, check his temperature, and wipe away his sweat. Everything had to be done with precision. Because if I fell into chaos, my son would suffer. One time, I saw my reflection in the blank TV screen, hair messily tied up, face pale, dark circles under my eyes, wearing a baggy, oversized house dress. I asked myself, who is that person? Then, little Milo made a soft cooing sound, his tiny hand flailing in the air. That question instantly vanished. I was just a mother. And being a mother, sometimes, doesn't allow you to be weak. Around 10 that morning, the rain started its soft drizzle again. I had just rocked Milo to sleep and placed him in his bassinet, pulling a thin blanket over it to dim the light. I tiptoed as if I were walking on ice, terrified that any sound would startle him. I had barely sunk into the sofa to catch my breath when the doorbell chimed. Asterisk ding dong. Asterisk I froze. My heart gave a powerful thump, the kind you feel when you hear a strange noise in the middle of the night. I glanced at my phone, no text from Hannah. I hadn't ordered anything. As for my neighbors, I barely interacted with them, being in my postpartum recovery. The bell chimed again, steady and clear. I stood up and walked slowly to the door, my hand unconsciously pulling my shirt tighter across my chest, as if I could hide my anxiety. I didn't swing the door wide open. I opened it just a crack, with the security chains still latched. A woman alone at home has to protect herself. Out in the hallway, the damp smell of rain clung to the walls. The dim yellow light stretched the shadow of the person standing at my door. I peered through the crack, and a chill ran through me. A man in a dark suit stood there, tall and straight-shouldered, his face so familiar I thought I was seeing things. Beside him was a young woman in a light-colored coat, her hair styled in soft waves, holding a thick, embossed envelope that looked like a wedding invitation. I felt my heart drop into an empty pit. David was standing at my door. And the woman beside him was no stranger. It was Victoria. The woman whose name had once drifted through my life like a whisper of sweet, expensive, and cold perfume. I tightened my grip on the door chain. In the room behind me, Milo was still sleeping peacefully. Suddenly, the old saying, "The sins of the father are visited upon the son," echoed in my mind. Not because my son had done anything wrong, but because I knew, from that moment on, the peace my son and I had cherished for the past few days would be shattered. Victoria was the first to speak. She flashed a smile, the kind of practiced smile one gives in front of a camera, just friendly enough, just polite enough that no one could find fault. "Ava? I'm Victoria, a friend of David's." Her voice was as smooth as poured tea. "David and I are getting married soon, so we wanted to stop by and invite you, as a courtesy." I looked at the envelope in her hand. The wedding invitation was embossed on thick, high-quality paper with sharp, clean-cut edges, the kind of invitation people show off on social media with the caption "number classy." I wasn't surprised. David had always liked everything to be perfect and polished, from his tie to the way people perceived him. David stood beside her, not smiling, not even saying hello. He looked at me the way you look at a long-lost colleague in a meeting room, present, but not belonging. I kept the chain on the door. Inside my home was my son, born 10 days premature, just discharged from the hospital. The doctor had warned me to limit his exposure to strangers. I couldn't, for the sake of courtesy, throw my door open to welcome them. "I'll take the invitation." "Thank you," I replied, my voice as steady as I could make it. "But I'm in my postpartum recovery. It's not a good time for visitors." Victoria didn't back down. She leaned forward slightly, as if trying to peer into the apartment through the crack. I saw that look clearly, the look of someone who came to visit but really wanted to inspect. "Oh, of course, I understand," she said, but her hand still held the invitation out, closer. "We'll only be a minute. After all, you and David were family once." The word family felt light on her tongue, but landed like a stone in my stomach. Asterisk family, asterisk. For the past 6 months, no one from that family had asked if I was alive or dead. Asterisk family. Asterisk. The kind that left me to go to doctor's appointments alone, to undergo surgery alone, to endure the pain alone. Victoria said that word as if she were slapping a new label on an old wound. I reached out to take the invitation, using both hands as a sign of respect. Not because I respected them, but because I refused to be painted as the rude one in a story they were scripting. At that exact moment, from behind me, came a soft sound. A. Asterisk. It was Milo. Just a single sound, as faint as a sigh, but it was enough to change the entire atmosphere in the hallway. I instinctively spun around. Milo must have just shifted in his sleep, his lips pursed, his little hands waving in the air. Without thinking, I took a step back, reached down, and lifted him into my arms. His skin was warm, and the faint scent of fresh milk filled the air. I held him against my chest, gently patting his back to soothe him. When I turned back to the door, I saw David, frozen. His eyes were locked on the tiny, red-faced baby in my arms. The man who was always in control of everything had suddenly turned to stone. Victoria also froze for a half-beat. The smile was still on her lips, but the corners of her mouth were stiff, as if someone had just yanked a thread. "Oh!" she exclaimed, her voice still sweet but now with a sharp edge. "You just had a baby? How many months old is he?" The question sounded innocent, but I knew it was a knife. Divorced for 6 months, and here I was holding a newborn. No matter how I twisted the timeline, I couldn't make a newborn look 3 or 4 months old to suit their narrative. Victoria was asking to confirm her suspicion, and also to save herself from the feeling of being deceived. I looked her straight in the eye. I didn't need to explain the details, and I certainly didn't need to justify myself to my ex-husband's future wife. "I just gave birth," I said curtly. "He's still very young. You two should go." Victoria let out a small ah, as if trying to maintain her composure. Her eyes darted to David, then back to me, sharper this time. "Well, that must be a lot of work for you." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm just asking so I know what to say in my congratulations. And wow, time really flies, doesn't it?" I heard the words "time really flies" and felt a chill run down my spine. She wasn't cursing at me, but she was setting a trap. She wasn't being vulgar, but she was trying to humiliate me, hoping I'd fall for it. David still hadn't said a word. He just stared at the baby, his expression shifting from stunned to confused, and finally, to a darkness that fell over his face like a curtain being drawn. He took a step forward. "Whose is he?" David asked. His voice was hoarse, not loud, but the words landed with immense weight. I could hear the grinding of his teeth in every syllable. The question wasn't just for me. It was for himself, for his honor, for the clean slate he thought he had wiped. I held my son tighter, feeling as though if I loosened my grip even for a second, they would snatch him away. I spoke slowly, clearly enough that no one could misunderstand. "He's my son." David let out a short, disbelieving laugh. Then he bit out each word, his eyes boring into me. "We've only been divorced for 6 months, and you're holding a newborn." Victoria whipped her head toward David, her voice rising with bruised pride. "David, what is this? You told me everything was settled, clean and finished." David didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on me, as if Victoria were just background noise. "Let me in. We need to talk," he said. I stood my ground, blocking the narrow opening. Inside was the warmth of my child, outside was the rain and things that could make him cold. I didn't want the neighbors to hear the words son and divorce, but I also didn't want to open the door and let them walk back into my life as if they were walking into their old house. I took a deep breath and looked directly at David. "We can talk right here, and keep your voice down," I replied. "I'm recovering. My son is a preemie." David wouldn't accept that. He leaned down slightly, his voice low but carrying a weight that pressed down on my shoulders. "I just need a few minutes." As I hesitated, Victoria interjected, her voice sweet but laced with venom. "What are you so afraid of, Ava? If you have a child, you should be transparent, right? Or is it that you—" I cut her off with a look. No shouting, no cursing, just a direct stare that said, "Don't you dare." I didn't open the door wide. I just unlatched the chain and opened it a little wider, enough for me to step back while still controlling the entrance. I didn't invite them in. I merely allowed them entry to avoid a public scene. David stepped inside first, as naturally as if he had entered this home 100 times before. Victoria started to follow, but David held up a hand, stopping her as cold as a knife. "Wait downstairs." Victoria froze. "But I'm your fiancé." I said, "Wait downstairs." David cut her off. His voice wasn't loud, but it was so sharp that she knew it was not a suggestion. Victoria stood at the threshold, her face pale. She shot me a look that seemed to say, "You just wait." Then she finally turned on her heel and walked quickly down the damp hallway. The door closed. In the small apartment, I stood with my son in my arms, facing the man who was once my husband. And I knew, from that moment on, this was no longer about a courtesy wedding invitation. The moment the door clicked shut, I immediately turned and walked quickly into the living room, positioning myself in front of the bassinet out of a protective instinct. Milo was still in my arms, his breathing a soft, rhythmic flutter. His face scrunching up as he started to wake. I patted his back, murmuring, "Shh. It's okay," to calm him, while my eyes never left David. He stood in the middle of my living room like a stranger who had wandered into a place he didn't belong. My rented apartment was small and functional. A worn beige sofa, the bassinet against the wall, a foldable dining table, and a few bags of baby supplies I hadn't had time to put away. There was no scent of expensive cologne, only the faint smell of rubbing alcohol and freshly washed baby clothes that hadn't quite dried in the damp air. David scanned the room, his gaze lingering for a moment on the area of my C-section incision, visible beneath my loose-fitting dress. He didn't say it, but I knew he was calculating the cramped space, my weakened state, and the fact that I had no one standing behind me but myself. He spoke first, his voice still hoarse but carrying its usual commanding tone. "How many days has it been since you gave birth?" 5 days, I answered, without beating around the bush. He paused for a beat, his eyes drifting back to Milo, lingering on the baby's pursed lips. Then he asked his second question, so direct it sent a shiver down my spine. "Why didn't you tell me?" I let out a small, bitter laugh, as sharp as grapefruit peel. "Tell you for what, David? So you could schedule fatherhood into your calendar like another business meeting?" David's brow furrowed in clear annoyance. He always hated being spoken to like that, because it struck at his pride in being the one in control of everything. "Don't evade the question," he growled. "I have a right to know." I tightened my arms around my son, feeling as though if I let go for even a second, this child would become evidence in an argument. I looked at David and spoke slowly, each word landing like a nail on the floor. "Your rights are not more important than my son's peace." David took a step forward. Just one step, but the space between us seemed to shrink. "Whose child is he?" he repeated, his voice lower this time, but sharper. "Don't give me that my son nonsense. We've been divorced for 6 months, and you're holding a newborn. What do you expect me to believe?" I didn't back down. I had backed down too many times in our marriage. I took a deep breath, feeling the incision ache from standing for too long, but I remained upright. "What you want to believe is your business," I replied. "But I'll say it one more time, he is my son." David stared at me, his eyes slightly red. I didn't know if it was from anger, shock, or some emotion he hadn't yet named. He reached out his hand, an instinctive gesture, as if to touch the baby. I flinched and turned, shielding my son with my body. That small movement made David's eyes darken. "What are you doing?" he snapped. "I am protecting my child," I said, my tone formal now, not to be rude, but to keep myself from growing weak. "He's a preemie, the doctor said to limit contact with strangers." "I'm his father," David declared, his words sharp and final, as if stating an undeniable fact. I looked at him, my calmness, surprising even myself. "You're so sure of yourself," I said. "You say that with the same confidence you use when signing a contract." David gritted his teeth. "Don't test me." "I'm not testing you," I replied. "I'm just stating the facts. You weren't here on the days I needed you." And now you show up with a wedding invitation and a woman at my door, and you declare you're the father. How do you expect me to react?" David fell silent. The kind of silence of someone who's just been doused with a bucket of cold water but is still trying to maintain his composure. He glanced down at the bassinet, at the neatly folded diapers, at the open can of formula. His eyes landed on a stack of papers clipped together on the table, the corner of one page revealing the words hospital discharge form. I felt my throat go dry. Those papers were the remnants of a journey I had walked alone. David asked slowly, his voice less harsh but still full of control, "When did you get pregnant?" I didn't answer right away. Some questions seem simple, but answering them is like offering your neck to be held. I just said, "You don't need to investigate." David gave a humorless smile. "Don't need to? You think you can hide this forever? You're divorced, you can live however you want, but if that's my son, it's not something you can just hide away." I looked at him for a long time. In that moment, I understood what he was truly afraid of. It wasn't that his son would grow up without a father, but that he would be known as a man who abandoned his child. The reputation of a man in a high-ranking position was sometimes heavier than any sense of love or duty. My voice was even, but cold. "Did you come here for your son, or because you're afraid people will find out you abandoned him?" David froze, his eyes narrowing as if I'd hit a nerve. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I didn't need to hear his answer. It was already written in his demeanor from the moment he arrived at my door, cold, efficient, and focused on damage control. He changed his approach, his tone becoming so formal and legalistic that I had to be on guard. "I will follow the proper procedure," David said. "I need to establish paternity. If he is my son, I have a responsibility, and I also have rights." I heard the word rights and wanted to laugh. During our marriage, he had often spoken of responsibility, but it was usually just words. Now that his responsibility was tied to his reputation, he spoke of it like a contractual clause. I took a half step back, not out of fear, but to place Milo gently back into his bassinet. The baby had fallen asleep again, his tiny hands curled in front of his chest. I pulled a thin blanket over him to shield him from any drafts, then turned back to face David. "You want to follow procedure?" "I won't stop you," I said. "But listen carefully. My son is very weak. His health is the top priority. You will not carry him off somewhere without my consent. You will not take him out in the rain. And you will not bring strangers into this house without my permission." David looked at me, his expression a mixture of anger and surprise, as if he was just now realizing that the woman standing before him was no longer his meek, submissive ex-wife. "Are you setting conditions for me?" he asked. I nodded, not flinching. "Yes," I replied. "Because a mother's love for her child is as delicate as holding a precious vase. Anyone who is a mother would understand. I am not using my child as a bargaining chip." David let out a sharp breath, his hands clenching and unclenching. He glanced at the bassinet one more time, his voice dropping slightly, but still not soft. "I'll get a paternity test," he said. "I need to know the truth." "I agree to a paternity test," I answered immediately, which seemed to surprise him. "But only when the doctor gives the all-clear, and at a facility of my choosing. There will be proper paperwork, clear records. I will not let you do whatever you want." David looked at me as if he were sizing me up. I knew he was used to winning with power, money, connections, and status. But in this small room, the one thing he couldn't buy immediately was the consent of a mother. He stood still for a few seconds, then gave a very slight nod. "Fine," David said. "But remember, if he is my son, then from this day on, everything changes." I didn't reply. I just looked at him like one would watch an approaching storm, knowing for certain you're going to get wet, but not yet knowing just how drenched you'll be. The moment David finished his sentence. "From this day on, everything changes," he pulled out his phone, scrolling quickly as if he'd been waiting for my nod to execute his plan. Watching him, I knew the change he spoke of wasn't about him becoming gentler, but about him managing the situation more tightly. "Where are you living now? Renting or owning?" David asked, his eyes still fixed on the screen. I frowned. "Why are you asking?" To make arrangements, he answered curtly. This place is damp and small. A premature baby can't stay here for long. It sounded like concern for our son, but the way he said it was like he was evaluating a poorly constructed building. I found it ironic. When I was his wife, he rarely asked if I was tired or if I'd eaten. Now that I was the mother of his son, he suddenly remembered standards. My son is fine, I said. The doctor advised against changing his environment. Don't make decisions on your own. David looked up at me, his eyes sharp, but this time he didn't growl. He switched to a softer, yet more infuriating tone, the tone of someone who believes they are offering the perfect solution. Ava, I don't want to argue. I just want to do the right thing. Whatever you need, just say it. Money, a nanny, a doctor, I'll take care of it all. I heard the word money, and my chest tightened. Not because of pride, but because I knew that from David's mouth, money was never unconditional help. It always came with strings attached. I looked him straight in the eye. It's good that you want to provide, but remember, providing doesn't give you the right to command. You're being overly sensitive again, David sighed. I'm just doing what a father is supposed to do. No, I replied, my voice not loud, but clear. What a father is supposed to do is respect the mother of his child, especially when that child is lying right there, so small and fragile. David glanced at the bassinet. Milo was sleeping peacefully, his lips pursed, occasionally frowning as if in a dream. I saw David's expression soften for a fraction of a second before hardening again, as if he was reminding himself not to get soft. He walked toward the table where I'd left the stack of hospital papers. He didn't snatch them, but his hand reached out, casually flipping the corner of a page as if he were reviewing a file. I immediately placed my hand over the stack. Don't touch those without my permission, I said. David froze, looking at me in disbelief. It's just a hospital discharge form. A discharge form contains medical information about me and my son, I said, enunciating each word. And I have not given you permission. At that moment, I saw genuine frustration in his eyes. He was used to holding other people's signed documents. Today, a single thin sheet of paper was blocked by my hand, the hand of a woman he once thought would always be compliant. David took a half step back and raised his phone to his ear, calling someone. I only caught snippets. Arrange a reputable lab for me. Paternity test. Fast, with proper procedure. I cut in. David, don't book anything yourself. I already told you, we follow the baby's doctor's advice. I choose the place. David covered the microphone and looked at me, his voice low but full of pressure. How long are you going to drag this out? I gave a faint smile. You think raising a child is like signing a contract and being done with it? David didn't answer. He turned away to continue his call, but stopped when I stepped forward, positioning myself between him and the bassinet. I didn't do anything dramatic, I just stood there. But for David, it was a declaration: if you want to touch this life, you have to go through my consent. He ended the call abruptly, stuffed the phone in his pocket, and looked straight at me. You're afraid I'm going to take the baby, David stated. I didn't shy away. I'm afraid you and your family will turn him into a prop to prove your honor. David scowled. You make it sound like I'm a bad person. I took a deep breath, feeling my incision twinge, but I kept my voice calm. Good or bad isn't about what you say. It's about the fact that you came to my house today with a wedding invitation. David was silent for a few seconds, then he said, his tone sounding like an explanation but also like shifting blame. The invitation was a courtesy. I laughed out loud. This time, it wasn't bitter, just tired. What kind of courtesy involves bringing your fiancé to knock on the door of your ex-wife who just gave birth? Do you think anyone would hear that and call it civilized? David's face flushed, not with shame, but with being called out. He clenched his jaw. Victoria didn't know. She didn't know, yet she stood there scanning my home like she was taking inventory? I retorted. You know exactly what she was doing. David went quiet. I suddenly realized there are some things that don't need to be vulgar. Being overly polite can be sharp enough. David changed his tone, as if trying to pull me into a weaker position with a sweet promise. "I'll transfer you some money," he said. "For now, to cover medicine, formula, and to hire some help. You just had surgery, you shouldn't be pushing yourself." I looked at him. If this were the old me, I might have softened at the phrase "you just had surgery." But the me of today only heard the words "transfer you some money." "I will accept support for my son if it's your responsibility," I said. "But I will not accept it in exchange for giving you the right to do whatever you want." David frowned. "You make it sound like I'm trying to buy you." "No," I replied immediately. "I'm just reminding you that there are no free lunches. I won't accept any favors that come with strings attached." The air in the room grew thick. Outside the window, the rain tapped rhythmically on the glass. David stood in the middle of the room, and I stood by the bassinet. It felt like we were on opposite shores, with a tiny baby in the middle, a baby everyone wanted to hold, but no one had asked what he wanted. David looked at me for a long time, then sighed, his voice dropping. "I'm just afraid," he said slowly. "I'm afraid you'll disappear. You've done it before." I froze. I had disappeared. It was true. I had moved, changed my number, and cut ties with our mutual friends after the divorce. But disappearing wasn't a childish game, it was a survival instinct. I looked at David, my voice softer now, no longer sharp, just direct. "I disappeared because there was no place for me in your family's home. I don't want my son to grow up seeing his mother treated like an outsider." Before David could respond, the doorbell rang again, this time more insistent than before. I jumped, turning my head. David also turned, a look of alarm on his face. The bell rang again, followed by a rapid knocking, and a familiar voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Ava! Open up! I brought you soup." I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding, like someone who'd just spotted a life raft. I walked quickly to the door, still keeping the chain latched as I opened it a crack. Hannah stood there, her hair wet with rain, holding a bag of hot food, her face flushed from rushing up the stairs. The moment she saw me, before she could even start nagging, her eyes darted inside and froze when she saw David standing in the middle of the room. Hannah blinked, then her lips tightened. Well, she said, her voice drawn out, light but heavy. "David. Look who decided to find his way here." Hannah didn't wait for an invitation. She pushed her way in, set the bag of food on the table like she was placing a heavy stone in someone's path. The fragrant smell of chicken noodle soup filled the room, chasing away the damp chill of the rain, but Hannah's face was colder than the rain itself. David looked at Hannah, his eyes narrowing slightly. He was clearly annoyed that their private conversation had been interrupted. But Hannah wasn't the type to be intimidated. "Are you here because of a wedding invitation or because of the baby?" Hannah asked, getting straight to the point. I flinched. Hannah had just hit the rawest nerve. David paused for a beat, then replied in a tone that tried to remain calm. "This is between Ava and me. You don't need to get involved." Hannah scoffed, a dry, harsh sound. "Between you and Ava?" She repeated. "So where were you for the last 6 months when Ava was dealing with morning sickness? When she was throwing up until her face turned pale and had to take a cab to her appointments alone? When she was on the operating table, signing her own consent forms? Why didn't we hear you say this is between us then?" David's face flushed, not with shame, but with being directly confronted. He clenched his jaw, glancing at me as if hoping I would stop Hannah. But I didn't. I had stayed silent for too long. "Are you done?" David growled. Hannah didn't back down. She pointed toward the bassinet, her voice dropping, each word like a nail being hammered in. "Look over there. A tiny, premature baby, just out of the hospital. You come here, stand in the middle of her home, and talk about your rights? Don't you find that ridiculous?" David turned to look at the bassinet. His gaze wavered for a moment, then he immediately put his cold, familiar mask back on. "I am the child's father," David stated, his words clipped and certain, as if reading an obvious fact. Hannah tilted her head, looking at him as if he were a cheap magic trick. "Father?" she asked. "What kind of father?" A father who's too busy with projects, too busy with clients, too busy getting married to someone else? I felt my hands turn cold. Not because Hannah was exaggerating, but because it was the truth. There David stood, in his perfectly pressed suit smelling of expensive cologne, while I was in my house dress with messy hair, holding our premature son. Two different worlds. David let out a sharp breath. Don't mix different issues together. Different issues? Hannah emphasized. You bring a wedding invitation to the home of your ex-wife who just gave birth, and you call that a different issue? David looked at me, as if wanting me to explain for him. But I just stood by the bassinet, my hand resting on its edge as if guarding the most precious thing in my life. I had no obligation to make him look good in front of my friend. Hannah turned to me, her voice softening slightly but still sharp. Ava, what did he say to you? She asked. I answered concisely. He wants a paternity test. Hannah whipped back around to face David, her eyes blazing. A paternity test? She challenged. You think this is a piece of merchandise you can just inspect whenever you want? He's a premature baby. The doctor said to limit contact, limit travel. Do you understand the word danger? David frowned. I know. That's why I want to do it by the book, during a checkup, following proper procedure. I realized he was starting to speak in legal terms. And when a man like David talks about the law, it's not just about responsibility, it's a weapon. Hannah lowered her voice, but her words grew heavier. You talk about proper procedure and it sounds so nice. But if you remember, any proper procedure puts the child's best interests first. If you try anything funny, we won't let you get away with it. David looked at Hannah. Are you threatening me? Hannah gave a faint smile. Threatening you? I'm just reminding you to be decent. You reap what you sow. Don't think that just because you have money, you can do whatever you want. David's lip curled slightly. What do you think I'm using money for? Hannah didn't answer right away. She walked over to the table, opened the bag of food, took out a container of hot soup, and turned to me. Ava, you need to eat. If you don't, you'll get exhausted. And if you're exhausted, they'll have an excuse to say you're not fit to raise your son. I froze. Her words were like a wake-up call. I looked at Hannah and understood immediately. She wasn't just angry, she was strategizing. Hearing this, David's eyes darkened. He looked at Hannah as if he'd just discovered his opponent wasn't a fool. I have no intention of taking the child from his mother, David said, his voice strained. But if he is my son, I will claim him and I will provide for him. I looked at him. What did his providing entail? Money? Nannies? Or the right to make all the decisions? Hannah cut in again, her voice firm. You can claim your son, but you listen to me. Claiming your son doesn't mean you get to turn Ava into a stranger in her own child's life. David flinched slightly. I'm not turning anyone into anything. Hannah looked at him, her gaze so intense it felt like she could see right through him. You don't have to, she said. You just have to be subtle about it. Send people over to help, send money to support, and slowly, Ava loses her right to decide. I've seen it happen plenty of times. I shuddered, because that was exactly what I had sensed the moment David pulled out his phone to make arrangements. No locked doors, no cages, but he would bind me with reasonableness. David turned to me, his voice dropping, this time with a hint of sincerity. Ava, you need to understand. I can't walk into my wedding while people are whispering that I abandoned my child. Those words landed like a stone thrown straight at my heart. So that was it. His reputation, the gossip, his public image. I didn't blame him for wanting to claim his son. I just hated being turned into a problem that needed to be handled before his wedding. Hannah looked at me, then at David, and let out a wry laugh. Ah, she nodded. So that's what this is about. You're worried about losing face, not about your son being cold. David flushed, but he didn't deny it. And his silence was the answer. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to speak with logic. I agree to the scheduled checkup, I said. But everything follows the baby's doctor's orders. If we do a paternity test, it will be done through the proper civil procedure, with paperwork, clear records, and my signature. Under no circumstances will you take my son anywhere by yourself. David looked at me, his eyes widening slightly, as if he had just heard an acceptable condition. He gave a slight nod. Fine, he said. You choose the place. Hannah immediately sealed the deal, her voice like a lid snapping shut. And one more thing. She said. All communication must be in writing. Texts, emails, whatever you say, whatever you promise, there needs to be proof. No more verbal agreements that you can deny later. David looked at Hannah, his expression annoyed, but he didn't argue. Perhaps he understood that the more ambiguous things were, the more trouble they would cause. I bent down to look at Milo. He was sleeping peacefully, unaware that the adults around him were using him as a reason to pull and tug at each other. I thought about the weight of family legacy and just hoped my son would grow up without having to witness his parents fighting. David paced around the living room, then stopped. His voice was calmer, but still carried an air of authority. I'll arrange for a car, he said. For when the doctor says it's okay for us to go. Hannah let out a disbelieving laugh and shook her head. There you go again, arranging, she said, emphasizing each word. You need to remember, you're not the boss here. This is Ava's home. David stood still for a beat, then he left with a final sentence that sent a chill down my spine. Tomorrow, I'll have my lawyer contact you to make everything official. I looked at him, and an image of a path immediately formed in my mind. If I wasn't prepared, I would be led down it. Hannah looked at me too, her expression serious, and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, Ava, we need a lawyer too. I nodded slowly. For the first time all day, I no longer felt like a passive victim. I was starting to see a plan. It was still blurry, but at least it was a path I would walk myself, not one I would be dragged down. After David left, the apartment fell quiet again. The kind of quiet where you can hear every single raindrop hitting the windowsill. I sank onto the sofa, my incision throbbing like someone was pinching it, but my hand instinctively rested on the side of the bassinet. Milo was sleeping soundly, his lips pursed, his tiny hands curled in front of his chest. I looked at him and felt my heart stretch like a thin wire, so taut that the slightest pull could snap it. Hannah didn't let me sit in silence. She opened the container of soup, blew on a spoonful, and placed it in my hand. Eat, she said simply. This is not the time for you to play the tragic heroine. If you get weak, they'll have an excuse. I took the spoon and managed a few bites. As the warm soup went down, I finally realized I was trembling. Not from the cold, but from the understanding that a door had just been opened in my life, a door I couldn't close just by pretending not to hear the knocking. Hannah pulled a chair closer and lowered her voice. If he's having a lawyer contact you tomorrow, then we need someone on our side too, she said. I'll introduce you to Miss Lewis. She specializes in family law. She's easy to talk to and doesn't use scare tactics. I nodded. I hated legal battles, but I hated being cornered even more. People say honesty is the best policy, but when it comes to your children, being too honest can sometimes mean putting yourself at a disadvantage. That same afternoon, Hannah made the call. Miss Lewis scheduled a virtual consultation first, since I was still recovering and couldn't easily take a premature baby out. I adjusted my laptop, sitting by the window for better reception. Hannah sat beside me, her face still stern, but her eyes sharp and alert. Miss Lewis appeared on the screen. She was a woman in her 40s with a calm, steady voice, but her eyes were sharp. She didn't waste time on personal drama, she asked only for the necessary facts. The date of the divorce, the baby's birth date, his premature condition, medical records, and David's current demands. I explained everything concisely, point by point. When I got to the part about David demanding a paternity test, Miss Lewis nodded and explained immediately. Listen, Ava, she said. David has the right to establish paternity and an obligation to pay child support. However, with a child under 3 years old, in most cases, the court prioritizes granting primary physical custody to the mother, provided she is a fit parent and there are no factors that would harm the child. The most important thing is the child's best interest. And since your son is premature, his stability is paramount. I heard the words prioritizes the mother and let out a small breath of relief, but Miss Lewis raised a hand to caution me. Don't get complacent. Prioritizes doesn't mean guaranteed. If his side can prove you're unstable, neglectful, in poor health, or that you're intentionally obstructing his visitation rights, they will use that against you. So, you need to be both firm and flexible. Do everything by the book. Hannah leaned in. He's rich. He has connections. What if he sends people to help and provide 24/7 care? Miss Lewis looked straight at the camera. That's a form of soft control. They don't lock you in, but they create a sense of dependency until you gradually lose your decision-making power. The way to handle it is to ensure every agreement has clear boundaries. Communicate everything in writing texts, emails, and absolutely do not sign any documents without reading them thoroughly. I swallowed hard. I remembered David standing in my living room, saying, "I'll take care of it all." It sounded so reassuring, but that kind of reassurance was like a heavy blanket. Warm at first, but it could suffocate you before you knew it. Miss Lewis continued. Regarding the paternity test, don't obstruct it. Obstruction will backfire. But you have the right to demand it be done through proper civil procedure, with verified documents, the consent of the legal guardian, and a clear record. Remember this phrase: checkup first, paternity test second. Your son is a preemie. We do it when the doctor says it's safe. I nodded repeatedly. The phrase was simple, but it felt like a stake driven into the ground, something I could hold on to. As for evidence, Miss Lewis went on, I need you to prepare the following: hospital discharge papers for both you and the baby, the follow-up appointment schedule, the doctor's written instructions about limiting travel, and receipts for formula, medicine, and diapers. Keep a daily log of the baby's temperature. The more detailed, the better. Don't dismiss these everyday things, they are proof that you are the primary caregiver. Hannah lightly slapped the table. See? I told you. I let out a small laugh. It was quiet, but I suddenly felt the weight on my chest lighten. It's true what they say. When you're in trouble, you seek help from all corners. Not out of superstition, but because in your hardest moments, you have to find the right people. Miss Lewis gave one final piece of advice that sent a chill down my spine. If they show up at your house with multiple people to pressure you, do not get into a shouting match. Stay calm and say only one thing: all matters concerning the child will be handled through my lawyer and according to the doctor's instructions. The calmer you are, the harder it is for them to trap you. The consultation ended. I felt like I had just been handed a map. Not a map for a battle, but a map to navigate a storm without getting lost. That evening, Hannah helped me organize the papers into a file folder. I no longer left them scattered on the table. I also started a log, noting the times of Milo's feedings, diaper changes, his temperature, and the status of his jaundice, like a daily journal. It was tiring, but I knew that prevention was better than a cure. When people started asking questions, I wouldn't have to recall memories through tears. Around 11 p.m., David sent a text. It wasn't long, just a few lines. Asterisk, I suggest we take the baby for his checkup the day after tomorrow. I'll arrange for a car, and we can get the paternity test done at the same time to get it over with. Asterisk, I read it, and didn't reply immediately. I looked at my sleeping son, then at Hannah. Hannah tilted her head. Reply exactly as Miss Lewis said. I slowly typed out each word, clear and devoid of excess emotion. Asterisk, Milo is a preemie, and his checkup will be as scheduled by his doctor. I agree to take him to his appointment. The paternity test will be performed after the doctor confirms he is healthy enough, and it will follow civil procedure with proper records and documentation. The location will be of my choosing. Asterisk. After I hit send, my hand trembled slightly, but not from fear. It was the tremble of someone learning to do something I had rarely done before, drawing a clear boundary without asking for anyone's permission. David's reply was almost instant. Fine. Send me the address. Just 3 words, but I could tell he understood. To legitimize this, he had to follow the legal path. And on that path, I would not be left behind. That morning, the rain had subsided, but the air was still damp. I was up early, not because I'd slept well, but because I was anxious. I had spent most of the night watching my son's every breath. For me, taking a premature baby outside felt like carrying a candle in the wind. One wrong move, and the flame would go out. I chose a private clinic near the city center. It had a dedicated pediatric wing and its own lab, and it was clean, with clear procedures. I had sent the address to David the night before, along with my conditions: arrive on time, bring your ID, speak quietly, and don't cause a scene. David didn't argue. He just texted back, okay. That okay from him made me smile to myself. I used to wait for his okay to go out for dinner. Now, I used it to lock down a boundary to protect my son. Hannah arrived early, carrying a bag packed as if for a military operation. Swaddling blankets, a hat, mittens, a thermos of warm water, spare diapers, wipes, and a light jacket for me. You just had surgery, she said. A little bit of wind and you'll get sick. Her words warmed my heart. Sometimes, a little help when you're in need is worth more than a feast when you're full. I held Milo, wrapped tightly in a blanket, leaving only a small opening for him to breathe. I didn't let anyone else hold him, except for Hannah, who helped me get in and out of the car. David arrived on time. He stood by his car, still dressed in a suit, perfectly polished, his hair neatly combed, as if he were going to sign a contract, not to a doctor's appointment for his son. He looked at Milo, his expression different from before. It was no longer completely cold, there was a hint of awkwardness, like a man standing before a tiny being who shared his blood for the first time. Are you holding him securely? David asked in a low voice. I didn't answer whether I was or not. I just said, walk beside us. Don't touch the blanket. I'm keeping him warm. David nodded. This time, he listened. At the clinic, I handled the check-in myself. I presented his discharge papers, the appointment card, and my private insurance card all neatly organized in the folder, just as Miss Lewis had advised. The receptionist looked at me, then at the baby, and asked softly, "Is he a preemie, ma'am?" I nodded. She led me to a priority waiting area. Hannah sat to my right, guarding the diaper bag. David sat across from us, his hands clasped, his eyes darting between his watch and the baby. I knew he was getting impatient, not for his son, but to get something over with. The doctor called Milo's name. I carried him into the exam room, with Hannah right behind me. David stood up instinctively. I looked at him and said clearly, "You can come in, but be quiet and stand back." He startles easily. David nodded and followed us in. The doctor was a middle-aged man with a gentle demeanor. He reviewed the file, asked me a few questions about Milo's feeding and sleeping habits, the number of wet and soiled diapers, and then he checked for jaundice, listened to his lungs, and took his temperature. Milo fussed a little, his face scrunching up, but I patted him gently, and he quieted down. The doctor looked up and said exactly what I needed to hear. Because he's a preemie, his immune system is weak. For the first few weeks, you should limit travel and exposure to strangers. If you have to go out, keep him well covered, avoid drafts and air conditioning, and stick to the follow-up schedule to monitor his jaundice. As he spoke, he wrote it all down in the file. I paid close attention to every word. To me, it wasn't just advice, it was a shield. If anyone ever accused me of intentionally obstructing access, I had this. David stood in the back, listening silently. When the doctor mentioned limiting exposure to strangers, I saw his hand clench slightly. He looked at me, his eyes swallowing a bitter pill. It turned out he couldn't just get whatever he wanted. After the checkup, a nurse directed us to the lab for a consultation on the civil procedure for a paternity test. I had prepared myself mentally, but my heart still felt heavy, as if weighed down by stones. The lab technician handed me a stack of forms and explained the process clearly: verification of the requester's ID, the mother's ID, the child's information, and the signature of the legal guardian. I read every line, asking questions where needed. Hannah stood right by my shoulder, like an anchor. David presented his driver's license and signed his name with a swift, practiced motion. When it was my turn, my hand trembled slightly. I wasn't afraid of the test result, I was afraid of what it signified. Once the result was clear, people would have a reason to step more forcefully into my son's life. I signed. The sample collection took place in a private room. The nurse put on gloves and explained that she would be taking a buccal swab from inside Milo's mouth with a special cotton swab. The procedure was quick, painless, and would only cause a little discomfort. I held Milo, cradling his head gently. He was dozing, unaware of what was happening. The moment the swab touched the inside of his cheek, he startled, his face turned red, and he let out a piercing cry. It was a small cry, but it was as sharp as a needle. I felt my heart constrict. I held him tighter, cooing nonstop. Shh, shh, Mommy's here, Mommy's here. David stood behind me, not touching the baby. But I saw over my shoulder that he had turned his face away. He turned completely toward the window, as if he couldn't bear to watch any longer. The muscles in his jaw were tense, and his hands were clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. I didn't know if he was in pain because he felt for his son, or because he was realizing just how much he had already missed. The nurse finished quickly, but the baby was still crying, a choked, whimpering cry of a baby whose sleep had been disturbed. I pressed him against my chest, rocking him gently. Hannah handed me a prepared bottle, and I let him latch on. After a few sips, his crying subsided, and his eyelids drooped. Only then did I let out a breath, feeling like I had just navigated a turbulent river. David turned back around. He stared at our son for a long time. He didn't say I'm sorry. David was never good at apologies, but this time, his voice was low and hoarse. Did it hurt him? I wanted to laugh, but I couldn't. I just replied, he was just uncomfortable. He's a baby. David was silent. Then he looked at me, his tone shifting back to his usual, rational self. When will we get the results? That question pulled me right back to reality. I knew he was anxious because the result was the key that would unlock his official title. They said a few days, I replied. I'll be picking them up in person. David frowned. I need a copy too. You'll get a copy after I've received mine, I said clearly. Everything will be done according to procedure. David looked displeased, but he didn't argue. I understood that he was getting used to not being in complete control. As we left the clinic, the rain started to drizzle again. I wrapped the blanket tightly around Milo, shielding his face from the wind. David held an umbrella, tilting it so that it covered the baby more than himself. It was a small gesture, but I saw it. Hannah leaned close and whispered, "See? He's not completely heartless. But don't go soft. Go soft, and you're done for." I nodded. A strange tug-of-war was happening inside me, part resentment, part pity. Resentment for all the months I was alone, and pity watching him turn his face away when our son cried, as if the sound of it was a slap to his own face. But I could no longer afford to live by my emotions. From now on, everything would run on two parallel tracks, one of emotions and one of the law. And if I had to choose to protect my son, I would choose the path paved in black and white. That afternoon, I had just finished bathing Milo and was drying his baby clothes when my phone started buzzing nonstop. It wasn't one call, but a series of missed calls from both unknown and familiar numbers. I looked at the screen and felt a prickle of dread. I'd experienced this feeling before when I was living with my in-laws. Whenever there was a scandal, the gossip mill churned faster than an ambulance. Hannah, who was in the kitchen reheating a pot of spinach soup, heard the phone and looked over. "What's up?" she asked. I shook my head. "I don't know." I didn't answer the unknown numbers. I only picked up when I saw the name of a former client I had worked with on a project. As soon as she answered, she spoke, her voice a mix of curiosity and probing. "Ava. I heard David has a son now?" Is it true? I froze, one hand instinctively clenching the cloth I was holding. The news was out. It had spread so fast I hadn't even had a chance to breathe. Where did you hear that? I asked, trying to keep my voice normal. Oh, just from some mutual acquaintances, business partners, she said with a light laugh. I was just calling to check in. You just had a baby? Oh my God. I didn't give her any details. I just said, yes, I'm doing well, and ended the call. After I hung up, I stood there for a few seconds, my ears ringing as if I just heard an alarm. Hannah walked over, and one look at my face was all she needed. They're fishing for information, she said, her tone certain. Not through the press, but word of mouth is even more toxic. I didn't argue. I knew that for someone like David, information within his circle could spread with a single phone call. And once it was out, no one cared about the truth, they only cared if the story was juicy enough to retell. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was David. I stared at the screen, took a deep breath, and answered. Hello? I said. David didn't beat around the bush. His voice was more rushed than usual. Have you heard anything? I have, I replied curtly. There was a pause on the other end, then David said, his voice lower, the news leaked. People have been calling me like crazy. I didn't ask who leaked it. I knew it wouldn't matter. Once a secret leaves one person's mouth, it will find its way into another's. I only asked what I needed to know. What are you going to do? David let out a sharp breath. I'm going to postpone the wedding. I heard that and felt a strange mix of amusement and bitterness. Postpone the wedding? Because his son was just born, or because he was afraid of being known as a man who abandoned his child? I didn't taunt him. I just said, that's your business. It's not just my business anymore, David replied quickly, his voice firm. It involves our son. I wanted to ask how, but I held back. I already knew. Involvement, in David's terms, usually meant a situation that needed to be managed. David continued. From now on, I'm arranging for someone to help you. 24/7. I frowned. I don't need that. You do, David cut in. You just had a C-section, and the baby is a preemie. I don't want to risk anything. It sounded reasonable, but I could hear the hook. I lowered my voice and said clearly. If you want to provide support, we discuss it first. I will not have a stranger showing up at my house unannounced. David replied. Her name is Mrs. Peterson. She's an experienced postpartum doula who has worked with my family before. A chill went down my spine. Your family? What did that mean? It meant she was his family's person, someone familiar with their rules, someone who would listen to them. And if she came into my home, would it still be my home? I said definitively, I will consider it. But she will only provide support during the hours I need her. There will be no 24/7 arrangement. There was a moment of silence, then David said, his voice strained, fine. I'll have her come by tomorrow morning. Be home. He hung up. I sat down on the sofa, feeling as if someone had just wrapped a soft rope around my wrist. It wasn't tight yet, but I knew it would be if I let my guard down. Hannah stood with her hands on her hips. I knew it. He's starting to play nice. I looked at her. What do you mean, play nice? Hannah gave a wry smile. It's the kind of nice that makes you feel indebted. And once you're indebted, it's hard to say no. You accept one little favor, and you have to be careful with every word you say. I was silent. I knew Hannah was right, but I also knew I was weak, and my son was weak. I couldn't fight a war with the entire family while I was still recovering. I had to choose a path that was soft but unbreakable. That night, Victoria called me. I stared at the number, hesitating for a few seconds before answering. I didn't want to give her an excuse to say I was avoiding her. Ava. Victoria's voice on the other end was no longer sweet like it was in the hallway. It was cold, thin, and sharp. Are you happy with what you've done? I frowned. What have I done? You showed up at just the right time, Victoria said, her words dragging as if through clenched teeth. Right when we were about to get married, you have a baby. And now you've made David postpone the wedding. You're quite the schemer. I let out a single laugh, but it wasn't a happy one. I laughed because her logic was so familiar. Women are always accused of scheming, while men always have an unavoidable reason. Victoria, I said, my voice calm. I didn't show up. You and David came to my house. Victoria was speechless for a moment, then her tone turned bitter. So you got him back? Is that it? I replied instantly. I'm not trying to get anyone back. I'm just trying to keep my son. There was a few seconds of silence, then Victoria dropped a comment that was quiet but vile. Are you even sure he's David's son? I gripped the phone, my chest burning with humiliation. This was a direct attack on my character, the kind that doesn't use profanity but leaves a deep stain. I didn't scream. I just spoke slowly and clearly. The paternity test results will answer that for me. And you should be careful what you say, because a mother's honor isn't something you can just smear whenever you feel like it. Victoria scoffed. Are you threatening me? I'm not threatening anyone, I concluded. I'm just done arguing with you. Then I hung up. Hannah had overheard bits and pieces, and her face was pale with anger. The nerve of that woman. I wiped my face, trying to calm my breathing. I remembered Miss Lewis's words, the calmer you are, the harder it is for them to trap you. I couldn't let my emotions lead me into a trap. The next morning, Mrs. Peterson arrived. She was a woman in her 50s, stout, with a soft voice. She carried a bag of newborn care supplies like a seasoned professional. She stood at the door and greeted me politely. Good morning, ma'am. Oh, I mean, Ava. She corrected herself when she saw how young I was. I opened the door just enough, not inviting her in right away. I stated my terms first. You'll be working by the hour. I need help with bathing the baby, washing his clothes, and preparing simple meals. I'll handle the rest myself. She nodded eagerly. Yes, of course. Don't you worry. As she stepped inside and saw Milo in the bassinet, a phrase escaped her lips naturally. Oh my, what a fine young master we have here. I turned sharply, but I didn't raise my voice. I just said clearly, my tone still polite, please just call him the baby. He's a child, not a young master. Mrs. Peterson froze, then gave an awkward laugh. Yes, of course. It's just an old habit. I knew it wasn't just a habit. It was the habit of the wealthy. To call a child by a title. And a title was exactly what my ex-in-laws would use to pull my son toward them. I looked at Milo and made a silent promise to myself. The storm wouldn't stop just because I wanted peace. And if that was the case, I would have to stand firm and create a safe place for my son, no matter how hard the waves outside tried to crash in. If you, our dear listeners, have made it this far, please don't go just yet. If this story has touched you, we hope you'll give our channel a like to support Silver Lining Storytime. And if you were in this situation, what would you do if your ex-husband suddenly returned to claim his child while preparing to marry someone else? Please leave a comment below, because there's a twist coming that even I didn't see. That morning, Mrs. Peterson had just finished changing the bassinet sheet when the doorbell rang. I froze, my heart pounding. Ever since David's visit, the sound of the doorbell had become a jolt to my nervous system. I went to the door, kept the chain on, and peered through the crack. David's mother, Catherine, stood in the hallway, accompanied by his father, Richard. Catherine was holding a basket of gourmet foods and a gift bag with gold lettering from Nordstrom. Richard held a still-dripping umbrella, a look of unease on his face. Catherine's eyes swept over me, her voice not loud, but cold. Ava. I heard the news, so I came to see my grandson. I took a deep breath and maintained my composure. Hello, Catherine. Hello, Richard. The baby just fell asleep. Please come in, but if you could keep your voices down. Catherine stepped inside first, placing the gift basket on the table as if staking a claim. Mrs. Peterson emerged from the kitchen and bowed her head immediately. "Good morning, ma'am." I saw Catherine's gaze flick over Mrs. Peterson and then land on the bassinet, her eyes lighting up with the look of someone who has just found what they were looking for. She moved toward the bassinet. I immediately stepped in front of it, gently but firmly blocking her path. "Please, keep your distance. He's a preemie." Catherine looked up, a thin smile on her lips. "A grandson of the Miller family will not be raised in a place like this." Her words landed with the finality of a gavel. Richard cleared his throat, as if to stop her, but the words were already out. I placed my hand on the edge of the bassinet, my voice soft but steady. "I understand. But he needs his mother. And at this stage, the doctor has advised against changing his environment." Catherine's eyes scanned the small apartment. "Living in a rented place like this. It's damp. Raising a child like this, he'll get sick before you know it." The words rented place made my face flush. I fought back the anger and replied with facts. "I have a follow-up schedule and medical records from the doctor. I'm keeping him warm and maintaining a sterile environment. What doctor is better than having a private family doctor?" She retorted, then turned to Richard. "Look at this. Leaving a child like this, it's a shame." Richard looked at me, his voice slower. "We're not saying you can't raise him, Ava. But having help would make it easier." "I have Mrs. Peterson helping me by the hour," I said. Catherine let out a small, sharp laugh. "By the hour? You're raising my grandson, and you're counting the hours?" I knew what she meant. My son was her grandson, so my rights were only temporary. I looked up, and for the first time, I spoke to her with clear boundaries. "Catherine, I am his mother. I will be the one to make decisions concerning him." Her smile grew sharper. "Anyone can be a mother. Mothers are replaceable. What's important is the family name he carries." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Her words weren't vulgar, but they were a direct assault on my dignity. I swallowed the lump in my throat, telling myself to be patient, but patience didn't mean bowing down. "I'm afraid I can't agree," I said slowly. "He needs his biological mother. A child needs his mother like a young shoot needs its protective sheath. Without it, the shoot will break." Richard sighed. "Catherine, you're being too harsh." Catherine didn't turn around, only adding, "The whole world will laugh in our faces." Then she shifted to a tone of magnanimity. "We will bring our grandson home to the family estate. You can stay there and care for him if you like. The house is large, with plenty of staff. It's more convenient." I heard the words "stay there" and "care for him if you like," and felt a chill run down my spine. I replied curtly, without arguing. "I am not taking him anywhere." Catherine frowned. "Are you trying to keep my grandson from his family?" "No," I said, my voice even. "I am not forbidding you from visiting. But I am his primary caregiver. If you want to be a part of his life, you will respect his mother." She pushed the gift basket toward me. "Take this. For your health." I looked at the gift, knowing it was a soft rope. I chose to accept the courtesy, not the power play. "Thank you. I appreciate the gift. But my decisions regarding my son remain my own." Catherine stood up, adjusting her sleeve. "Fine. We'll see you in court." The word court made my heart leap. Richard's face tightened. "Catherine, don't say that." Catherine walked to the door, leaving behind a final warning. "David cannot be known as a man who abandoned his child. I will file for custody." Richard followed her out, but paused to look at me, his voice much softer. "Take care of yourself, Ava. If you need anything, just call me." The door closed. I lifted Milo into my arms, pressing him against my chest. He smelled of milk and was still sleeping peacefully, unaware that someone had just tried to turn him into a title. I turned to Mrs. Peterson. "From now on, if anyone comes to the door, you inform me first. Do not open it yourself, and do not let anyone in without my permission." Mrs. Peterson nodded frantically. I picked up my phone, stared at the screen for a moment, and then texted Miss Lewis, one simple line, * David's mother just came by. She threatened to file for custody, and mentioned court. * I looked at my son and told myself, life can be chaotic, but my one job is to keep him safe. Less than 10 minutes after I sent the text to Miss Lewis, she called me back. Her voice was as steady as ever, but I could hear the seriousness in it. Ava, stay calm, she said. David's mother might be saying that to intimidate you, but don't be afraid. The important thing is that you stick to the principles we discussed. A child under 36 months is prioritized to be with the mother, as long as you're a fit parent and don't do anything to jeopardize your case. I sat down, holding my son with one arm and the phone with the other. I'm afraid they'll use my living situation against me, saying I'm unstable because I'm renting. Renting is not a crime, Miss Lewis replied immediately. Stability isn't just about owning a house. It's about a safe environment, a primary caregiver, a consistent routine, and proper medical care. The fact that your son is a preemie with medical records actually strengthens your case. But, she paused for a beat, you have to prove it with actions, not just words. What do I need to do now? I asked. Do these 3 things immediately, she said, her voice like a checklist. 1. Photograph all medical records for both you and the baby. Save them digitally and make physical copies. 2. Start a detailed daily care log, the more specific, the better. 3. Keep all communication with David and his family in writing. If they call, send a follow-up text summarizing the key points of the conversation as evidence. I nodded repeatedly, like a student cramming before a final exam. After the call, I didn't allow myself to wallow. I did exactly as Miss Lewis instructed, starting with the smallest details. I took out my file folder and organized it into sections: mother's records, baby's records, expenses, communications. I clipped my discharge papers separately from my son's. I used a highlighter to mark the doctor's instructions about limiting travel on his follow-up schedule. I photographed every single page, saved them in a dated folder, and sent a copy to Hannah, just in case something happened to my phone. Hannah watched me work and nodded. That's right. They're good with words, you be good with paper. I gave a faint smile. I never wanted to be good at this. Who does? Hannah sighed. But desperate times call for desperate measures. If you want to keep your son, this is what you have to do. I got a new notebook and, on the first page, wrote Milo's journal. Below it, I logged every detail. 6 a.m., fed 2 ounces, 7 a.m. Diaper change. 9 a.m. Temperature check. 10 a.m. Nap. 12 p.m. Sponge bath. They seemed like trivial things, but I knew that in a courtroom, or in front of an agency, these trivialities would prove who the true caregiver was. I even kept receipts for formula, diapers, saline drops, gauze, baby wipes, and the taxi fare from his last checkup. I wasn't saving them to get reimbursed, I was saving them to prove how consistently and carefully my son was being cared for. Mrs. Peterson, washing bottles in the kitchen, saw me diligently writing and asked softly, "Why do you go to all that trouble, ma'am?" I didn't blame her. I just replied, "I'm writing it down so that if anyone asks later, I'll have an answer. My son's well-being is not a matter of hearsay." She mumbled something and went silent. Just then, my phone buzzed. It was a text from David. Did my mother stop by to see the baby? I looked at the message and didn't reply right away. I remembered Miss Lewis's advice: summarize the key points, be concise, and remove emotion. I typed, Catherine and Richard visited. I explained that Milo is a preemie and needs limited contact. I am not forbidding visits, but I am his primary caregiver and will make all medical decisions for him based on his doctor's advice. After I sent it, I waited. David replied a few minutes later. My mother said you were being difficult. I smiled to myself. Difficult. In their eyes, a woman protecting her child is always called difficult, while they apply pressure and call it caring for their grandson. I texted back, *I am only fulfilling my responsibilities as a mother. I hope you will respect my boundaries. David went silent. I thought that was the end of it. But that evening, he called. I stared at the screen, then answered, not wanting to be accused of cutting off communication. What is it? I asked. David's voice was low. I'm going to transfer you $3,000 a month for now, to cover formula, medicine, and help. I'm also setting up a $50,000 trust fund for him. I'll have someone bring over the papers for you to sign tomorrow. I sat up straight. The phrase papers for you to sign immediately put me on high alert. What papers? I asked. A document confirming you've received the funds, David said, as if it were routine, and an agreement for Mrs. Peterson to stay and provide 24/7 care. I heard that, and my blood ran cold. The rope was starting to tighten. I will accept child support. That is your responsibility, I said slowly, but I will not sign any paper allowing her to stay 24/7. I've already told you, she will work the hours I require. David let out a sharp breath, his voice becoming strained. You just had surgery. You can't handle it all on your own. Whether I can handle it or not is my business, I replied. If you want to help, then help in the right way. Don't turn support into surveillance. David was quiet for a beat. I could hear him inhale, as if trying to control his temper. Ava, I'm not trying to surveil you. I just want to ensure his safety. I didn't argue further. I delivered the line Miss Lewis had given me. All matters concerning the child will be handled according to the doctor's instructions, and through legal counsel if necessary. David froze. Are you threatening me with a lawyer? I'm not threatening you, I replied. I'm seeking clarity. When things are clear, no one gets hurt. The other end was silent for a longer time. Then David said, his voice lower, Fine. If you won't sign the 24/7 agreement, then don't. But I'm still providing the money and the trust fund. I only answered, transfer the funds. I will confirm receipt via text message. No strange paperwork is necessary. David wasn't happy, but he didn't argue anymore. He hung up. I put the phone down and looked at Milo, who was sleeping. He was so innocent, while the adults around him were calculating every move like a chess game. I suddenly remembered the saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. But in this story, the rods weren't for teaching the child. They were the clauses and conditions the adults were wielding to fight each other. Hannah sat beside me and whispered, You did the right thing. Don't sign anything strange. One signature and you're trapped. I nodded. For the first time in days, I no longer felt like I was trembling before them. I was still scared, but it was a fear with a plan. I knew what I had to do, what I had to keep, what I had to record. I looked at my journal. On the page, my handwriting was neat, the timelines clear. I suddenly understood. From now on, I wouldn't just be raising my son with milk and warmth. I would be raising him with vigilance. Because in a war between adults, only the calmest person can protect what is most precious. That afternoon, my phone rang with a call from the lab. I was adding a few more lines to Milo's journal when my heart suddenly started pounding like a hammer against my chest. Hello? I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The technician on the other end confirmed my information and then said, Your results are ready. You can come pick them up in person or receive a digital copy via the email you registered. I chose to pick them up in person, not because I had free time, but because I didn't want this document floating around before it was safely in my hands. Hannah drove me. I bundled Milo up, even sticking a small warming pad on his chest as the doctor had instructed. At the lab, I signed for a sealed envelope, my hand trembling slightly. The envelope was thin, but felt heavy, like a door that had just been opened and would be very difficult to close again. In the car, I tore it open. The words were clear, probability of paternity, 99.99%. I wasn't surprised. I had known since the day I saw Milo frown, a frown that was identical to David's. But seeing that number on paper felt different, like someone had stamped an official, indelible seal on my life. Asterisk confirmed. Asterisk Hannah glanced over, muttered a soft curse, and then bit her lip, remembering I was holding the baby. She just said, "Well, now he has no room to deny it." I nodded, tucked the paper into my file folder, and zipped it shut. I didn't cry. I just felt a chill, because I knew that behind this number would come actions that were stronger, faster, and more aggressive. I was right. I had barely gotten home and changed the baby's blanket when David called. He didn't call to ask about his son, he called like someone who already had the schedule. "Did you get the results?" he asked. "I did," I replied. "Send me a picture of it," David said immediately. I paused. The way he said "send me" made me feel like an employee being given a task. I looked at my son and replied slowly, "I will send a scanned copy with my sensitive personal information redacted. If you need to use it for its intended purpose." David let out a dry laugh on the other end. "Why redact it? I'm his father." "You are times his times, father," I emphasized. "That does not give you the right to have all of my personal medical documents." David was silent for a few seconds, then his tone changed. "Ava, don't make this difficult." I didn't argue. I sent the file immediately. Just as I'd said, the sections with my information were blacked out, leaving only the confirmation of paternity and the case number. After sending it, I added a line, "I request that you do not share this with any third parties." David viewed it and called back instantly. This time his voice was low but firm, the tone of someone who had just gotten what he was waiting for. "From today, I am filing the paperwork to legally acknowledge my son," he said. "I'll handle all the formalities." I carried Milo to the sofa, sitting down to ease the pressure on my incision. "Filing to acknowledge him is your right," I replied. "But all decisions regarding his medical care and daily life during this period will still be made by me, according to his doctor." David didn't argue directly. He took a different approach. "I've transferred the first payment. Check your account. And I'm having a contract for a premium postpartum care service delivered to you, with a private nurse on duty." I looked up at the ceiling and sighed. The gilded kindness was back. "I don't need any service contracts," I said. "I only need help during the hours I request. And anyone who enters my home must have my approval." David's voice grew tense. "You're opposing me." "I am protecting my son and my rights as a mother," I replied, my voice still even. "My son needs a stable environment, and no one is going to disrupt it on a whim." David let out a sharp breath. I could hear him tapping something, a habit he had when he was annoyed. Then he said slowly, "You can't cut me out of his life." "I'm not cutting you out," I answered immediately. "I am only asking you to participate in the right way. If you want to visit, we agree on a time. If you want to take him somewhere, it requires the doctor's approval and my consent." David was silent, then he asked a question that sounded soft but was actually a demand. "How long are you going to live like this?" I looked at my sleeping son, my voice softening but growing firmer. "Until he is strong enough, and until you prove you're here for him, not for what the world thinks." The other end went quiet. I expected him to get angry, but he didn't. David was the type of person who got colder the angrier he became. "I'm coming over this afternoon," David said. "I want to hold him." I didn't argue about him holding the baby. I knew that being unreasonable would work against me. I just set the conditions. Be here at 5 p.m. Wash your hands, wear a mask, don't bring anyone with you, and don't discuss my private life with others. David replied with a single okay, and hung up. I had barely put my phone down when a new message from an unknown number appeared. I didn't have to guess who it was. "Victoria. Asterisk. You're good. I'll give you that. 99.99%. Huh. Congratulations on getting what you wanted." Asterisk, I read the message and felt a sting from her sarcastic, yet polite tone. I didn't engage in a back and forth. I replied with one sentence, direct and emotionless. Asterisk, what I want is for my son to have peace. Someone else's wedding or reputation is not my concern. Asterisk, Victoria replied almost instantly. Asterisk, peace? Don't pretend. A man doesn't just call off his wedding for someone else's peace. Asterisk, I locked my screen. I refuse to be dragged into that pit. Words are cheap, but some words drain your energy and composure. And right now, my composure was the most valuable thing I had. At exactly 5 p.m., David arrived alone. He washed his hands at the sink and put on a mask, just as I'd requested. I placed Milo on a nursing pillow and showed him how to support his head. David was awkward, his large hands trembling slightly. He lifted our son slowly, as if holding something incredibly fragile. Milo's eyes fluttered open, then closed again. David leaned down, his voice hoarse. He looks like me. I didn't reply. I just looked at his hands and reminded myself of one thing. Looking like him doesn't mean belonging to him. David held him for a while, then looked up at me, his eyes saying what his mouth wouldn't. Asterisk. From now on, I'm in charge. Asterisk. But I had already moved one step ahead of him. I spoke immediately, my voice soft but firm. You are his father. I don't deny that. But I am his mother. If you want to be a part of his life, you will have to walk through the door of respect. David looked at me for a long time. For the first time in years, I saw him without a ready-made answer. He just held our son a little tighter and gave a slight nod, like someone temporarily accepting a new rule he wasn't used to. In the small apartment, the rain continued to patter against the window. And for the first time, I understood clearly, from this day forward, my life and my son's would be governed by the most difficult thing of all. Not money, not apologies, but boundaries. I discovered it one afternoon while I was rocking Milo to sleep after a feeding. My phone, lying on the table, buzzed lightly and continuously. It wasn't a call, but a string of message notifications, one after another, and then a tag from a familiar account. I opened it. The sender was a woman I had worked with on a project, someone I was friendly with. Her tone, usually playful, was hesitant today. Asterisk, Ava, can I ask you something? Please don't be upset. People are saying you trapped David. Asterisk, I was stunned for a few seconds. The word trapped felt like a slap. It turned a child into a bait, a mother into a schemer, and the entire journey of my suffering into a calculated game. I didn't reply immediately. I took a deep breath and looked at my son, dozing in his bassinet. I reminded myself not to react with emotion. Reacting was falling into their trap. Hannah, who was preparing fish in the kitchen, noticed my long silence and came over. What's with that look on your face? I handed her my phone. After she read the messages, her eyes widened. Good heavens. She's starting to play dirty. I frowned. She who? Hannah scrolled through a few more messages. Who else but Victoria? I told you. She works in PR. She fights with public opinion. A chill ran through me. I rarely used social media, especially since becoming pregnant. I no longer had the energy for pretty pictures, coffee shop check-ins. My life revolved around my son's appointment schedule and sleep schedule. Victoria was different. Her life was her image, and someone who lives by their image is an expert at destroying someone else's. Hannah opened Facebook and typed in a few keywords. In a moment, she found it. The post didn't mention my name, didn't say Ava directly. It was just a long, vague status from a heartbroken woman, filled with suggestive lines. Asterisk. It's amazing how some people plan every single move. Divorced for barely a few months and suddenly holding a newborn. Some people seem so innocent, but they're not. Asterisk below, it was a flood of comments. Some sympathized, some were just curious, and some supported Victoria out of a love for drama. The most terrifying part was that some people were starting to connect the dots to me. They didn't need proof. The clue divorced for a few months and David's name mentioned in the comments was enough. Hannah immediately took screenshots of the post, the timestamp, the comments. She worked quickly, like a pro. "Screenshot everything," she said. "This is evidence. Don't engage with them online." I stared at the words and felt a lump in my throat. I wasn't used to being publicly smeared. I was even less used to having my dignity as a mother put on display like an object for sale. The most painful part wasn't that they were bad-mouthing me, but that they were implying my son was the product of a scheme. I put my phone down, my hand trembling. Hannah immediately said, "Ava, you can't shake. If you shake, my godson will feel it." I looked at my son. She was right. He didn't know what social media was, but he knew the rhythm of his mother's breath. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to be calm. I called Miss Lewis. She answered quickly and understood the situation after just a few sentences. "Do not respond emotionally," she said. "We will handle this with evidence and principles. Save everything. If necessary, we can issue a cease and desist and, depending on the severity of the defamation, consider legal action." I asked softly, "Should I text David?" "Yes," Miss Lewis replied. "But do it in writing, keep it brief, and frame it around the direct impact on the child's well-being. The longer this circulates, the harder it will be to stop." I hung up and opened my chat with David. I didn't complain or get emotional. I sent him the screenshots and a concise message. Victoria is posting content online implying I trapped you with our son, and it's spreading among our mutual acquaintances. This is an attack on the character of your son's mother and directly affects him. I demand that you stop this third party from spreading private information and have the post removed immediately. I have saved all evidence. After sending it, I put my phone down. I wasn't expecting David to protect me out of love. I just needed him to understand that this involved his son. David read it almost instantly. The read receipt popped up immediately. But he didn't reply right away. The silence was long enough for me to guess he was weighing his options, weighing his future bride against the mother of his child. Hannah paced back and forth, agitated. "If he stays silent, I'm going to her house, and I'll unmask her myself." I grabbed her hand. "Don't. That's exactly what she wants. She wants us to lose our cool." Hannah gritted her teeth but sat down. I knew she loved me, but love had to be strategic. About half an hour later, David called. "Are you home?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm home," I replied. "I'll handle it," he said curtly. "I won't let this go any further." I didn't thank him. I just asked directly, "How are you going to handle it?" There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm calling Victoria. If she doesn't take it down, I'm ending everything." I heard the word ending, and my heart skipped a beat. Ending the wedding or ending the relationship? I didn't ask. I just said, "What you do is your business. I just need my honor and my son's peace to be respected." David let out a sharp breath, clearly annoyed by my business stance. But he didn't argue. He just said, "I'm on my way." Less than 2 hours later, David arrived. This time, he didn't have the air of someone visiting his son. He had the air of a man whose reputation had been attacked. The moment he walked in, he asked, "Did you reply to her?" "No," I answered. "I just saved the evidence." David nodded. "Good." I looked at him and realized one thing. A man like David could overlook many things, but when his image and honor were on the line, he reacted faster than any emotion. David's phone rang. I saw Victoria's name on the screen. He didn't answer right away. He glanced at me, then walked out to the small balcony and closed the glass door. I couldn't hear everything, only snippets. Victoria's voice rose and fell, at times crying, at times shouting. David said very little, mostly short, sharp phrases. "Take it down. There are no buts. How far are you willing to take this?" A few minutes later, David opened the door and stepped back inside, his face as cold as if he just left a board meeting. He looked at me. "She said she was just venting." I gave a faint smile. Venting by dragging my son into it? David clenched his jaw. I told her to take it down. She hasn't. Then you know what she's chosen, I said. David looked at Milo, sleeping in his bassinet, his lips pursed. He stood still for a few seconds, then said quietly, as if to himself, "No one is allowed to touch my son." It was the first time I had heard him say that. It didn't sound like a slogan. It sounded like a decision. David turned back to me. If Victoria does this again, I will publicly call off the wedding. I didn't feel a sense of victory. I just saw the picture clearly. When two women are placed on the scales of a man's honor, the one who loses will not go quietly. Victoria would become even more bitter, and she would play even dirtier. I looked at David and said one short, meaningful sentence. You handle the rumors. I will protect our son. David nodded. But in that moment, I knew the battle had just escalated, from a private conflict to a public smear campaign. And once it went public, no one could keep their hands clean without being extremely vigilant. That evening, Victoria's post disappeared. It wasn't a natural disappearance, it felt forced. But the rumors lingered like smoke, the fire put out, but the smell of burning still in the air. I didn't go online to defend myself. I just had Hannah save a few more screenshots of the deleted post and note the time. Everything had to be documented. After 9 p.m., David sent a short text, *wedding is postponed. *. It wasn't an apology, not a reconsideration, just 3 words, like a decision made at a meeting. I looked at the message and sighed. I wasn't happy, nor was I sad for anyone. I just felt a huge weight lift off my son's future. At least David would no longer be standing at the altar, viewing his own child as a mess to be cleaned up. The next morning, David came by earlier than usual. He just texted, coming over in 15. I had just finished changing Milo's diaper when he knocked. I opened the door, still cautious, but this time my heart didn't pound like before. I was getting used to the rhythm of the waves. David stepped inside, not in a suit, but a simple button-down shirt. He was holding a small bag with baby-safe hand sanitizer, newborn-sized face masks, and a tube of baby lotion. Small things, but not for show. I didn't say anything. David stood by the bassinet, looked at Milo, and asked softly, "Did he fuss last night?" "He slept well. Only woke up twice to feed," I replied. David nodded. Then he did something I had never seen before. He washed his hands thoroughly, put on a mask, and stood waiting, as if asking for permission. I didn't say, "Go ahead." I just lifted the baby and placed him in David's arms, positioning his hands to support his neck. David held him slowly, clumsily, his shoulders a bit stiff, his hands trembling slightly as if afraid of hurting him. I didn't mock him. I just gave brief instructions. Support the neck. Hold him close. Don't rock him too much. David followed my lead. Milo's eyes fluttered open, and he let out a tiny yawn. David stood as still as a statue trying to breathe gently so as not to startle the baby. At that moment, I remembered that a father should be the roof of the house. But if that roof only existed to crush the mother and child beneath it, I would rather face the storm. After holding him for a while, David said, as if the words just slipped out, "Victoria called me all night." I didn't ask. I just said, David looked at our son, his voice hoarse. "She cried. Said I was cruel." I still didn't ask. I knew that when a man decides to end things, the woman on the other side will see it as a betrayal. But what caught my attention was what he said next. I told her, "From now on, she is not to mention you or our son again. I won't allow it." I looked at him. Did she agree? David gave a faint smile. No, I wasn't surprised. Someone who lives by their public image will not accept being pushed out of the frame. They will either try to claw their way back in or smash the frame of the other person. David placed our son back in the bassinet, pulled up the thin blanket, and turned to me. "My mother knows." My chest tightened. "She knows about the postponement," David confirmed. "And she's furious." Before I could say anything, David's phone rang. He looked at the screen, and his face darkened. Mom was displayed. He answered immediately, not avoiding it. He put it on low speaker, but I could still hear Catherine's sharp, demanding voice. David, what do you think you're doing? Are you trying to make this family a laughingstock? David's reply was short. I postponed the wedding. For what? She yelled. For that woman and that baby out there? I froze. Asterisk, that woman. Asterisk, I was the mother of her grandchild, but in her mouth, I was just the cause of a problem. David clenched his jaw. Mom, be respectful. That is my son. Catherine scoffed. If he's your son, then bring him here. We have the means, we have the staff. Leaving him out there is a disgrace. David's voice grew hard. Disgrace? Mom, have you even thought about the child? Catherine paused for a beat, then went straight for the kill. I'm only thinking about the dignity of this family's grandson. He can't be known as an illegitimate child. I heard the word illegitimate and my ears burned. I bit my lip to keep from crying out. If I interfered, she would have an excuse to call me disrespectful. David stood up straight, his voice firm. Mom, listen to me. The law says a child under 3 stays with his mother. I will acknowledge him, provide support, and visit according to a schedule. But you are not to pressure Ava. Catherine's voice rose. You're taking her side. I'm taking the side of what's right, David replied coldly. That made me shiver. David had never spoken like that before. He used to choose a neutral stance to please his mother. Now, he was drawing a clear line. Catherine screamed, What's right? She ruined your wedding. She humiliated our family. David cut her off. Mom, don't blame Ava. I postponed it myself. It was my decision. Catherine was silent for a few seconds, then she hissed through the phone. Then you'd better watch out. I will see this through to the very end. Asterisk click. Asterisk, she hung up. The small room was quiet again. I looked at David. He didn't look at me right away. He stared out the window for a moment, as if swallowing his anger. I asked softly, What are you going to do if she sees it through to the end? David turned back, his eyes hard. We will sign a formal custody agreement. My lawyer will draft it. It will be legally binding. Even my mother won't be able to cross that line. I heard that, and my heart sank a little. It was what I wanted, but it was also proof that my life would now be bound by paper and signatures, not just by goodwill. David walked over to the bassinet and picked up our son again. This time, he was less clumsy. He rocked him gently, his eyes fixed on the tiny face. Then he said, very quietly, I've missed so much. I didn't reply. Not because I wasn't moved, but because I knew words were the easiest part. People can be moved one night and go back to their old habits the next morning. I would just have to watch and see if his actions matched his words. Hannah walked in right at that moment, catching his last words. She let out a small HMPH. If you know you've missed out, then don't miss any more. David looked at Hannah and didn't argue. He just asked her, Do you know a good lawyer? Hannah raised an eyebrow and looked at me. Then she replied, Miss Lewis. Give me her number, David said. I watched him take the lawyer's number from Hannah, and a strange feeling washed over me. David was accepting a framework he had once despised, a framework of boundaries and measurable responsibility. But I also knew that from the moment he chose his son, he had opened a new front in his war, not just with Victoria, but with his own family. And when that front opened, it was usually the mother and child who were caught in the middle. I looked at Milo and told myself, one person can't do it alone. I couldn't win this by myself. I had to be smart, choose my allies, choose my documents, choose my evidence, and choose a way of life that would ensure my son didn't grow up surrounded by blame and tears. David held our son for a long time. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel completely alone. But I didn't dare trust that warmth too soon. Catherine returned on a morning when the sun was blazing after days of rain. Seattle's sun is strange like that. One moment it's damp and cold, the next it's so bright it feels like it's trying to expose everything. I was giving Milo a sponge bath when the doorbell rang, not insistently, but with a firm, commanding rhythm. Mrs. Peterson looked out from the kitchen, her face a little pale. I went to the door, kept the chain on, and peered through the crack. Catherine was there, this time without gift baskets. She held a thin file folder and was accompanied by a man in a white shirt and glasses who looked like a professional. Richard was not with her. I opened the door a crack, my voice polite. Catherine. Catherine didn't waste time. Open the door. I'm here to talk. I looked at the folder, at the man with glasses, then directly at her. May I ask who this is with you? The man gave a polite smile. I'm the family's legal advisor. I nodded, not showing fear. I just said clearly, then all the more reason to speak quietly and appropriately. I'm not receiving unfamiliar visitors at the moment. Catherine's lip curled. The family has an advisor, and you call him a stranger? Don't be so dramatic. I opened the door just enough for her to enter, but I deliberately positioned myself to shield the bassinet. When the man tried to follow, I held up a hand, still polite. Please wait in the living room. I'll call you if we need you. Catherine shot me a look, the kind that said, asterisk, this daughter-in-law is getting bolder by the day. Asterisk. She stepped in, placing the folder on the table with a thud, as if planting a flag. Ava, she said, using my name without any title. Let me be direct. This family wants to do things by the book. He is our grandson, David must claim him, and he must come home with us to be raised in the proper environment. I remained calm, my hand gently patting Milo's back to soothe him. It is David's right and responsibility to claim his son. I'm not stopping him. But as for where the baby stays during this period, the doctor's instructions are clear, and I have the records. Catherine waved a dismissive hand. Paperwork, paperwork. You always use paperwork to threaten me. Raising a child is about reality, not waving papers around. I didn't respond with confrontation. I simply walked over to my own folder, took out the single page with the doctor's written instructions times limit travel, limit exposure times, and placed it neatly on the table. I didn't throw it, I didn't toss it. I placed it like a fact. Please, take a look. These are the medical instructions. A premature baby is not suited for constant environmental changes. The man with glasses, standing outside, looked in, wanting to speak. Catherine jutted her chin. Tell her. He took a half step in, his voice measured. As I understand it, the father has the right to demand the best possible conditions for the child. I interrupted him, but not harshly. Correct. And best isn't just a big house or a lot of money. For a premature baby, best means medical stability, a primary caregiver, and a low-risk environment. I have a daily log tracking his progress. I opened my journal, flipping through a few pages. Blue ink, neat handwriting, feeding times, temperatures, appointments, medications. I didn't read it all, I just let them see it existed. This wasn't for show, it was a reminder. I was being a mother with actions, not just words. Catherine gave a faint smile. That's just for appearances. You're renting, you're a freelancer. How can you guarantee a future for my grandson? The words freelancer, she said it as if I were unemployed. I felt a surge of anger but kept my voice even. I have an income, I have contracts, I have a bank account, I can support myself and my son. Catherine leaned forward, her voice thin and cutting. Support yourself? You think that's something to be proud of? Let me be honest. A single woman can easily get into trouble. Who knows where you'll take my grandson, who you'll introduce him to? I froze. That was an attack on my character, on my image as a mother. I placed a hand on my chest, feeling my incision ache with tension. Are you implying that I am not a decent person? I asked, still not raising my voice. Catherine looked me straight in the eye. I am reminding you of your place. My grandson must be raised properly. I wanted to laugh at the word place. My place was as his mother. What was hers? the one who decided my son's fate. Just then, the doorbell rang again. Before I could react, I heard David's voice from the hallway. "Open the door." I let out a breath. I unlatched the chain. David stepped in, his face cold. He glanced at the folder on the table and the man with glasses, then looked at his mother. "What are you doing here?" he asked directly. Catherine's tone immediately softened, but it was still sharp. "I'm here to see about my grandson. You postponed the wedding, and I stayed quiet. But I will not let the world say this family is a mess." David pulled out a chair and sat down, refusing to let his mother speak down to him. He glanced at me, a silent question, "Are you okay?" I gave a very slight nod. The man with glasses started to speak. David held up a hand. "Who are you?" "I'm the family's legal advisor." David nodded, his voice flat. "Thank you. But this matter involves Ava's lawyer. When necessary, we will communicate through the proper channels." Catherine slammed her hand on the table. "David, she's got you wrapped around her finger with all this lawyer talk. Let me tell you, mothers are replaceable. As long as my grandson is in our home." She repeated the line, but this time, it was said in front of David. I saw him stand up, his eyes locked on his mother, unblinking. "Say that again," he said, his voice low and chilling. Catherine persisted. "I said, any mother." "Enough!" David cut her off, enunciating every word. "When you insult Ava, you are insulting the mother of my son. If you want a relationship with your grandson, you will respect his mother." The air in the room seemed to vanish. The legal advisor stood frozen, clearly not expecting David to be so direct. Catherine was stunned for a few seconds, then she turned to me, her eyes like daggers. "Do you hear that? You've turned him against his own mother." I didn't answer. I just held Milo closer, feeling his tiny warmth. I didn't want him to hear the adults, even if he was too young to understand. David turned to the man. "You can leave. This is a family matter. Don't make it more complicated." The man nodded, looking flustered, and walked out. Now it was just the three of us and a baby. Catherine looked at David, her voice trembling with rage. "You're choosing her over your own mother." "I am choosing my son," David replied. Not loudly, but with the finality of a gavel. "Do whatever you want, but do it legally. Don't use pressure, don't demand to take him away, and don't say things that are meant to humiliate her. I will not accept it." Catherine shot up from her chair. "Fine. Then I will see this through to the very end." "Go ahead," David nodded. "I will too. But it will be by the book. And I will be signing a formal custody agreement. Anyone who crosses that line will have to deal with me." Catherine gave me one last look, her eyes red with anger more than love. Then she turned and walked out without another word. The door closed. I could hear her heels clicking away down the hall until it was silent. David stood still for a few seconds, like someone who had just cut a rope that had bound him for years. He turned to me, his voice much softer. "Did my mother say anything else?" I shook my head. I didn't want to recount the details, it would only make me feel weaker. I got straight to the point. I need a clear agreement. With lawyers. Legally binding. David looked at the bassinet, at Milo, and nodded slowly. "I understand." I didn't thank him. I didn't soften. I just saw one thing. For the first time in this small, rented apartment, I wasn't standing alone to shield my son. But I also knew that one time wasn't enough. To have peace, we needed a framework. And that framework could only be the law, boundaries, and measurable terms. The next day, I received a text from Miss Lewis. David would like to meet this afternoon, at 2 p.m. Are you available? I read it, put my phone down, and looked at Milo sleeping. His chest rose and fell with each tiny breath. I told myself, the world of adults can be loud, but my son's breathing must remain peaceful. I replied, yes. I can do it online. The baby is still too young. Miss Lewis agreed immediately. She added, "Prepare a list of your requests in order of priority. Don't get drawn in by emotion." I took out my notebook and, instead of writing long paragraphs, I made a simple list with 3 headings: medical, residency, and dignity. To me, those were the 3 pillars. If one fell, my son would fall with it. At the scheduled time, the group call began. On my screen, I saw Miss Lewis, sitting up straight with a thick file in front of her. David appeared from his office, wearing a white shirt, with a glass wall and cold light behind him. He didn't look like he was there to apologize, he looked like he was there to close a deal. "Miss," Lewis began concisely, "today, we are here to agree on the principles. The child's best interest is paramount. This agreement is intended to minimize conflict and establish a framework for visitation, child support, and decision-making rights." David nodded. "I agree." Miss Lewis looked at me. "Ava, you can go first." I didn't beat around the bush. I spoke directly from my list. First, medical. Milo is a preemie. While he is under 36 months old, I will be his primary physical custodian. All medical decisions, including checkups and vaccinations, will be based on his doctor's recommendations, and I will be the primary decision maker. David has the right to be informed of the schedule and to offer his opinion, but he cannot unilaterally take the baby to another doctor or use a private physician to override my decisions. David started to speak, but Miss Lewis held up a hand. "David, please let Ava finish." I continued. Second, residency. The baby's place of residence will be with me. If I move, I will provide advance notice. However, no one is permitted to show up unannounced, demanding to take the baby or to bring people into my home without my consent. I paused for a beat, then stated what I considered the backbone of the agreement. Third, dignity. There will be no slander, no insinuations, and no spreading of private information about me or the baby in any form. If anyone associated with you does so, you will be responsible for putting a stop to it. David stared at the screen for a few seconds, then his voice grew tight. "I agree to the dignity clause. But on the residency part, I need assurance that you won't just disappear." I wasn't surprised. It was his genuine fear, and also a convenient excuse to create a leash. I replied immediately, without aggression. "I will not disappear from your rights as a father if you respect my boundaries. I agree to a clause requiring me to provide notice of the baby's residence and a clear visitation schedule. But there will be no clause that allows you to monitor me." Miss Lewis nodded, translating our words into legal language. "So, we will state that the mother has an obligation to inform the father of the child's residential address and contact number, and to provide X days' notice before a change of residence. The father shall not engage in unauthorized surveillance or apply pressure outside of this agreement." "What about a visitation schedule?" David asked. I had already thought it through, refusing to be cornered. Twice a week, for a maximum of 2 hours per visit, while he is still an infant. You will come to my home at an agreed-upon time, wash your hands, and wear a mask. If the baby is sick, the visit will be rescheduled. You may not take him outside without my consent. David frowned. 2 hours is not a lot. I looked him straight in the eye. It's not about what's a lot for you, it's about what's right for him. He is not an adult who can follow your schedule. Miss Lewis interjected, her tone soft but firm. "David, the agreement can be adjusted as he develops. For example, after 12 months, if he is stable, the duration can be increased, and short outings may be possible. But his health is the non-negotiable prerequisite." David was silent for a moment, then nodded. When it came to finances, David spoke quickly, as if to prove his goodwill. "I will provide $3,000 a month in child support. I will establish a $50,000 trust fund in his name for his education and medical needs." I didn't refuse, nor did I act grateful. I just clarified the execution. The support will be transferred on a fixed date each month, with a memo clearly stating child support for Milo. The trust fund must have transparent usage rules and cannot be used to pressure me. Miss Lewis noted it down, then asked, And regarding the helper, Mrs. Peterson? I answered immediately. She will only provide support during the hours I request. She will not stay overnight and will have no reporting duties. David sighed, clearly not liking that. I just want to make things less difficult for you, he said. Less difficult doesn't require reports, I replied calmly. Reports are about control. The line was quiet for a few seconds. I heard the soft click of Miss Lewis's pen. Then she concluded, so, we will include a clause stating the father may recommend support personnel, but the final decision rests with the mother. The support personnel will not collect private information or interfere with caregiving decisions. David looked into the camera, his voice dropping. I'm afraid you hate me, and you'll cut me out of my son's life. I didn't answer with emotion. I didn't say I don't hate you. I answered with principle. If you follow the agreement, I will have no reason to cut you out. I just hate being forced. Miss Lewis compiled everything and sent a draft that afternoon. She instructed both of us to read it carefully, to suggest wording changes, but to keep the spirit of the agreement intact, clear boundaries, clear rights and responsibilities, and no ambiguous language. That night, David texted. I've signed. I stared at the message for a long time. I didn't feel a rush of emotion, thinking, he's changed. I just acknowledged that a man who was used to being on top had willingly put his signature on a set of rules. Whether it was for his son or for his reputation, at least the rules were there. The next morning, Miss Lewis sent the final version. I read every clause slowly. Some lines made me feel lighter, the non-disparagement clause, the prohibition on taking the baby without consent, the conflict resolution mechanism, the scheduled visitation. I signed it. My hand didn't tremble like it did when I signed the paternity test form. This time, I was signing to build a guardrail, not to open a floodgate. After signing, I texted David one simple sentence, I signed for our son. He replied. Me too. I put my phone down and looked at Milo. He blinked, his tiny hand grasping my finger. I whispered, as much to him as to myself, in life, people can make 1,000 promises. But at least, we have it in black and white. After the agreement was signed, my small apartment suddenly felt lighter. Not because life had suddenly become kind, but because everything now had a clear boundary. To cross it would come at a cost. And for the first time since giving birth, I slept through the night without being jolted awake by the doorbell. David stuck to the visitation schedule. He didn't just drop by for show, and he didn't bring anyone with him. He arrived on time, washed his hands thoroughly, put on a mask, and waited for my permission to hold the baby. The first time, his hands trembled. The next time, he supported our son's neck more steadily. The time after that, he knew how to mix the formula to the right temperature, carefully measuring every milliliter as if one wrong number would upset the baby. I didn't praise him. I just observed. Because only time will tell. Mrs. Peterson continued to come at the hours I set. I gave her clear tasks, wash the baby's clothes, heat up my food, clean the bottles. When her time was up, she left. She no longer called him the young master. One day, she started to tell me a story about David's family, and I just said gently, Mrs. Peterson, let's just stick to our tasks. She understood and fell silent. I didn't dislike her, she was just doing a job. I disliked the way people wanted to use her to peer into my life as if through a keyhole. Victoria no longer called me. Her social media went silent. I don't know what David said to her, but from that day on, the veiled attacks vanished as if they had never existed. But I knew that someone who liked to fight with public opinion wouldn't swallow her pride easily. I didn't let my guard down. I still kept the evidence, still communicated in writing. Not for revenge, but for self-preservation. Better safe than sorry. Catherine also stopped showing up unannounced. She was probably still angry, still saw me as the cause of her problems, but she had hit a wall. I heard David say it once, briefly, my mother doesn't like it, but she has to accept it. That was all he said. I didn't ask for more. I didn't need to hear about the Miller family's arguments to tire myself out. I just needed my son to grow up without hearing adults blame each other. What surprised me most was Richard. One afternoon, I opened the door to a delivery, a container of homemade chicken soup, some herbs, and a box of soft baby cloths. Tucked inside was a small note with neat handwriting, asterisk from Richard. For the baby. Take care of yourself. Asterisk, he didn't sign off with love. But I knew it was him. I stood there, looking at the note for a long time. Some men aren't good with kind words. They just send something you need at the right time, their own clumsy way of saying sorry. Hannah still visited regularly, but now, she wasn't so tense. Every time she saw David, she would still make a sarcastic comment, but it was less harsh. One time, David was holding Milo, and the baby was fussing. David tried everything, but he wouldn't calm down. Hannah stood nearby and said dryly, "You know, babies don't come with a mute button." I laughed. David froze for a second, then he laughed too. That laugh didn't heal all the wounds, but it made the room feel a little less cold. 3 months after giving birth, I started taking on small projects again, editing design plans, doing online consultations. I didn't overwork myself. I refused to go back to the days of exhausting myself only to have someone else hold it over my head. David didn't object. He just asked, "Can you handle it?" "I'm working to live," I replied. "Not working to prove a point." He was silent, as if he understood. One evening, during a light drizzle, Milo fell asleep early. I stood in front of the mirror and, for the first time, saw a bit of color back in my cheeks. When I walked back into the living room, I stopped short. On the once empty wall, a framed painting was now hanging perfectly. It was a painting of sunflowers I had done in college, something I had forgotten in an old storage box. David was standing behind me, not too close. He just said quietly, "I had someone find it." I thought, "You used to be so vibrant. You shouldn't be hidden away." I didn't turn around right away. I stared at the painting, a lump forming in my throat, and then I reminded myself to stay clear-headed. I spoke softly, but firmly. "If you want me to be vibrant, then don't turn me into a shadow in your life." David was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. "I'll learn to stand beside you, not above you." That wasn't a plea to get back together. It was an acceptance of a boundary. And for me, it was boundaries, not tears, that could save a family. Dinner that night was strangely simple. Hot soup for me, a spinach dish Hannah had made. David ate rice with braised fish. Milo lay in his bassinet, cooing as if he were part of the conversation. There were no lavish meals, no performances. Just a home where people were learning, little by little, to be decent to one another. I looked out the window. The rain was a misty curtain, but inside, the warm yellow light no longer felt like the light of a cage. It was the light of a place with rules, with boundaries, with presence. And with a mother who was no longer afraid. In life, there are some things you should never give up. Like your dignity and your right to be a mother. And there are some things you should learn to let go of, like ego and the need for control. If you found this story thought-provoking, please a like. And if you have any feedback or similar experiences, please share them in the comments below. Thank you, our dear listeners, for staying with us until the end. We wish you all health and peace. We'll see you in the next story.